In part 4 of this video tutorial on animation in Blender 2.79, we shall look at some new options under the Insert Keyframe menu, like the Lock Rot option, which is for setting a keyframe of an object for the location and rotation. Next, we have Lock Scale, where you can set a keyframe for location and scale. Next, we have Rot Scale, where we can set a keyframe for rotation and scale. Next, we have Lock Rot Scale, where we can set a keyframe for location, rotation and scale of an object. Next, we have Delta Lock, where we can set a keyframe for the delta location of an object. Next, we have Delta Rot, which is for setting a keyframe for the delta rotation of an object. And lastly, we have Delta Scale, which is for setting a keyframe for delta scale of an object. Once we animate these objects and render them, it should look like this. Now we shall set keyframes to animate this UV sphere object. It is at location 008 and we have the timeline cursor in the timeline window at frame number 1. We shall set a keyframe for this location and rotation parameter. Select location, rotation. Move the cursor, timeline cursor to frame 50 and move the sphere object to a new location. Rotate it along the Z, X and Z axis. Now set keyframe using Lock Rot option. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 100. Move the UV sphere and rotate it again for a new location. Set keyframe. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 150. Change the location of the sphere and rotate it. Set keyframe using Lock Rot. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 200. Again, change the location and rotation parameter of the sphere. Press I and select Lock Rot to insert a keyframe. Last, you move the timeline cursor to frame 250. Move the sphere to a new location, rotate it and set keyframe. Now move the cursor to frame number 1 to play the animation. You see the sphere moves and also rotates. Next, we will select a monkey object and set keyframes for this object using the location scale option under the insert keyframe menu. The timeline cursor is at frame number 1. Select location scale for this location. Move cursor to 125 frame number. Relocate the monkey object. Scale it. Set keyframe. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 250. Move the monkey object to a new location and set keyframe. Play the animation. Next, we will animate this teapot using the rotation scale option. The timeline cursor is at frame number 1. For this rotation scale parameter, we will set a keyframe using rotation scale option. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 50. Rotate and scale it. Set keyframe again using the rot scale. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 100. Repeat the process. Next, move the timeline cursor to frame 150. Rotate and scale the teapot. Set keyframe. Repeat the process for frame 200 and 250. Now, take the cursor to frame number 1. Play the animation. Now we shall set keyframes for this teapot using the location rotation scale option. The cursor in the timeline window is at frame number 1. The teapot is at location 000. Now we will set a keyframe for this location. Rotation scale. Next, move the cursor to frame number 50. Rotate it and move it and scale it up. Set a keyframe using log rot scale. Next, move the cursor to frame number 100. Again, move the teapot, rotate it, scale it. Set a key frame. Next move to 150. Move the teapot, rotate, scale. Again set the cursor at 200 frame. Repeat the process, set keyframe. Next move to frame 250. Set a keyframe for this location, rotation and scale parameter. Now go to frame number 1 to play the animation. You see the teapot, as it moves along the x-axis, it also rotates and scales. Next, we shall look at delta location option. We have the cube here at location 000, and in the timeline window the timeline cursor is at frame number 1. We will set a keyframe for this location. Then move the timeline cursor to frame 250. Move the cube to x equal to 10 location. Set a keyframe for this location. Go back to frame number 1 to play the animation. Press the play key. The cube moves from unit x equal to 0 to x equal to 10. Stop it. Now duplicate this cube. And when you move it up and try to animate the original cube, the second cube, the duplicate cube, moves back to the original position. Suppose you still want the duplicate cube to be at a different location. That change in location should be entered in the delta location parameter under the data object data window. We also now play the animation. The two cubes play the same animation but maintaining a difference in location, which is specified by z equal to 5 in the delta location parameter. Now we will use the delta scale parameter to animate this monkey object. It's located at 000 and the timeline cursor is at frame number 1. At frame number 1, set a rotation keyframe. Move the timeline cursor to frame 250. rotate the monkey object by 90 degrees along z-axis, set a keyframe and play the animation. The monkey object, as we move from frame 1 to frame 250. Suppose we duplicate this object. It is overlapping, so we will just move it up by setting the delta location value by z equal to 10. Now compared to the original monkey object, this duplicate object is turned by 45 degrees. When you animate it, this duplicate object maintains a 45 degrees difference compared to the original cube. This is delta rotation option used for animation. Scale up the teapot. Set another scaling keyframe. Duplicate the teapot. Move it up by setting z equal to 10 and scale it up by a factor of 2. So when you play the animation, the duplicate cube scales up like the original teapot plus the scale up factor set in the delta transform. Notice that the duplicate cube is also positioned about 10 units up along the z-axis, but still it animates the scaling parameter. That's all. Thank you.